And the first thing is to say that, of course, there couldn't be a better time to discuss these issues because we collectively in Europe are in a mess at the moment on this issue. And I think it's a mess which matters, and the untangling of the mess matters, because it could still go any way. On the one hand, we've seen only in recent days the issue with the firebombing of Charlie Hebdo and the fallout from that. Once again, the now familiar routine. Even Time magazine, I think, just a couple of days ago, ran a piece basically saying why Charlie Hebdo deserves to be burnt down, and if anyone wants to take a crack at Time magazine now, they've made themselves open for it, because clearly if you disagree with something in a magazine, it's now simply expected, as a matter of course, that you don't write a letter to the editor, as in the bad old days. You approach the office with a Molotov cocktail and have your say that way. And then on the other hand, of course, we also have, and should consider the fact that there has been a very significant debate now, which has also arisen from the massacre in Norway carried out by Breivik. These twin things are worth mulling on, because I think somewhere between them we can find the way that these pieces will eventually arrange themselves. Because the mess that I referred to couldn't be worse in some ways. I mean, you heard already from Lars, you know all the case of what Lars went through here, and cases like the case of Wilders. And to my mind, and I hope to yours, if I'm not prejudging you, it doesn't matter whether people declared guilty or declared innocent. The fact that they're in a court at all is an outrage from the start. That is simply the direction in which it goes. Let me give you one legal example alone from recent years, the case of Geert Wilders with Fitna. Now, in the case against Wilders, as I say, innocent or guilty is not of any significance in these farcical proceedings. In the case of Wilders, the script of Fitna was put in as evidence in his trial. The script, as you will know, almost entirely consists of the rantings and ravings of various extremist Islamist scholars, religious leaders. Among them, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi. Now, Geert Wilders can end up in court having to defend himself against charges of inciting violence by producing a film in which Qaradawi appears. But of Qaradawi himself, not a problem. Not only not a problem, but worse than that. When Yusuf al-Qaradawi came to London under the radical leftist mayor Ken Livingstone, he was literally received with a red carpet. Bowings and scrapings and your honourness, and everything laid on. Now, how can it be possible that Geert Wilders can end up in a courtroom for quoting Qaradawi, but Qaradawi is received on a red carpet for being Qaradawi? These two things are not surely possible. If Qaradawi calls everyone in this room apes and pigs, and Geert Wilders says that Qaradawi has called everyone in this room apes and pigs, it should be Mr. Qaradawi who is in trouble and not Geert Wilders. Yet the system in Europe has got this exactly the wrong way around. There's a pretty much, or has been, an understanding that you really don't want to get into prosecuting imams for hate speech. You really don't want to get into that sort of thing, because Islam and Muslims are a very vulnerable minority and are at risk of hate crime against them. Now, there are reasons you could go into for them to think that. There was in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, much less so now, I think negligibly. There has been racism in British society as in other societies. I think it's not a negligible problem, but it's nothing like a sort of tsunami of hatred and you know, beating and killings and all that sort of thing. But to hear the political elites of Europe, you would think that is what it is. And you see again, recently, after the Breivik atrocity, the same thing coming up. You see, a lot of people after that started pointing fingers. It happened, I know, here in Denmark, it happened in Britain, it happened around Europe and indeed in America. And it pretty much went around the following route, which was that if, say, you were Bruce Bauer, and you'd highlighted terrible things that had happened in Norway, including honor killings and you know, human rights abuses carried out by Muslims on Muslims, that basically you had laid the path for Breivik to do what he did. Now, first of all, I'd say that is an appalling libel on the people who that was claimed of. But secondly, it shows so clearly, as I say, the political motivation of people involving themselves in this. Because how can it be? How can it be if an imam in Norway says, kill people, he is not responsible? And even if somebody were killed, you go, oh, that's a misreading. You misheard. Yet if somebody who has not only never called for anyone to be killed, but has actively said quite the opposite, can themselves be blamed, as it were, for laying the groundwork? How can this be other than to attribute to this a deliberate political motive? If a non-Muslim explaining an Islamic human rights abuse is laying the groundwork for murder, but an Islamist himself calling for murder is not, something is wrong. Something is very, very badly wrong. But as I say, there's a reason for this, which is that there is a political drive behind this. Take another example. In recent years, hate speech laws in Europe have pretty much believed, as they have in Canada and other countries, have pretty much believed that, as I said before, the populace, we, the people, are terrible, terrible bigots who just can't wait to kill people and burn things and all that. And just can't be trusted. And in the end, it'd be best if we probably didn't vote, which is why they're getting as near as they can to that by having the European Parliament. But the thing behind this that's so interesting is that the political motivation there is that we must sort of, as it were, root out the last remaining remnants of certain hatreds. And let me give you an example. The Deputy Prime Minister in Britain, called Nick Clegg, there's no reason you should have heard of him. I wish I had. This man, he gave a lecture to something a couple of years ago. I haven't been on the board of the European Institute for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism, and he gave a speech in which he bravely said that he was against anti-Semitism, and among other things, came out wholeheartedly to condemn Nazism. Wholeheartedly, no ifs, no buts. Against Nazism. And unfortunately, I had the first question. I said, you know, it always seems to me that anti-Semitism, for instance, is much like charity. It should, you know, I mean, and the fighting of anti-Semitism is much like charity. It should begin at home. So how come you've got a radical backbencher in your House of Lords, who actually at the time was one of the Foreign Affairs spokespeople for the Liberal Democrats, who's on record repeatedly saying all sorts of Islamist apologist stuff, all sorts of terrible things about Jews controlling the media? How come all that sort of thing? How come you ignore all that? But you're tilting at this completely fictitious wimble of sort of modern-day Nazism, as if the British people are about to, you know, there's a significant risk that next week they're all going to put on swastikas and start jackboots and, you know, march down. Well, you know, if it actually is your problem, if you actually do want to root out racism, if you actually do want to root out anti-Semitism, you know, start with the person sitting in your party. But of course, this is the problem. They are fighting last century's war 70 years too late, and expect to be congratulated for their political bravery in doing so. I think it's not as easy as that. It's really not as easy as that. And the fact that politicians and the sort of rights establishment think it is shows you so much about this. This is cowardice. This is terrible, terrible cowardice. They are believing that they are huge heroes and will pass laws until the last hour to make sure that no alcoholic designers in Paris can ever say that again, but they will ignore and refuse to prosecute somebody in Britain today, an imam who calls for Jews to be killed. Not as metaphor, as fact, as request, as order. This is the most obvious demonstration of the decline of our political class. And I would, by the way, highlight this, that I mean, there are all sorts of problems in the British media, as in other countries' media. We have a total double standard of the kind I was describing earlier. Whereby, for instance, if you say if you're a Conservative councillor who said that, you know, Powell said something that was quite true or something like that, yeah, then the press will make sure that all of that comes back. Whereas if, as somebody who's now a shadow minister, called Diane Abbott, if you said, as she did a few years ago, that your political hero is Mao, then it's all right. You're sort of allowed to get away with it. I did challenge her, I remember, on that. I said, well, what element of it, of the massacre of 60 to 70 million Chinese people, was it that you admired most? But she said that in the end you had to weigh these things up, and that he had led to significant leaps forward in techniques in Chinese agriculture. So there is obviously a very significant double standard in that regard, as in many others. The most consistent idiocy of certainly the last 10 years has been that it has become mainstream to acquiesce in the following line, which comes from much of the Islamic world, which, to summarize, is say my religion is peaceful or I kill you. And a lot of people in public life are simply willing to give themselves as easy a time as possible and go, okay, if that's the deal, I'd rather not get killed. I'll go along with saying it's peaceful, and so on. And I was doing a discussion recently, a debate in New York against a couple of very, in this particular case, very decent, relatively progressive Muslims, and with my friend Ayaan Hirsi Ali on my side. And it was very interesting because at one point the argument was Islam is the religion of peace, and Ayaan and I were on the other side. May have guessed. And it was very interesting because at one point, you know, they were trying to make their case, and it was just amazing because Ayaan said, you know, the people who are trying to kill me are inspired by the book you keep citing, are inspired by this religion. And in a moment of fatal narcissism, one of our opponents said, utterly truthfully, said, "You're not the only person on this panel, Ayaan, that is under death threat. I've got an Al-Qaeda fatwa on my head." And you know, I said, well, hang on. If Islam's such a peaceful religion, how come everyone on the panel, from all sides, even the ones saying it is, are under threat of being killed? It can't be. I mean, if we were discussing Quakers, it would probably be easier.
Many more such examples, though there are quite a few, is because prior to Dr. Tahir al-Qadri issuing this fatwa, his colleague, who was also from the same way of thinking, was assassinated in Pakistan, was killed by a suicide bomber in a mosque where all the other congregants who were praying were also blown to smithereens because he had the guts to simply give a sermon in that mosque condemning suicide bombings. And so this is why many people are scared, because it takes guts, I tell you, to go into Pakistan and try and challenge these extremists. You did support that fatwa, though, didn't you?
I did. It's the only time I've ever done a book review of a fatwa. I'm sorry to say this, Sir Majid, you seem to have just proved our point.
Yes.
Please explain.
Is it? I mean, I'm very grateful. It's a very important and very interesting question, why more people don't stand up. I much admire Al-Qadri for that fatwa, as I have other people who have stood up. But the number of times I've spoken to clerics behind closed doors and so on, and you say, why aren't you saying anything? They say, because if I do speak up, I'll be killed. Well, I address you again, ladies and gentlemen, to the motion.
No, but hold on. I'm sorry. Right,